this is just a collection of possible ways that we can achieve translations in Tableau and the kind of things we should think about. So all of these methods have some pros and cons, and we'll try to talk through those points during the session. So feel free to interrupt and ask questions. So I tried to summarize here the basically 3 ways that we achieve some translations in Tableau. When I talk about translations, I'm talking about, I think one of you already mentioned when we talk about so the data points themselves might need to be translated. The column headers, the captions on fields from database might need translation. Text objects in the dashboard, dates, number formats, and all these kind of things. So that what I said in the end, that dates, number formats, these sort of more localized things is what we call the local or regional settings. So I'm not sure if you have a requirement for that, but we'll touch on this as well. Maybe you might have a requirement to display things in a specific format. At least perhaps the dates need to be in local language as well. So yeah, so if we kick off by looking at this one, so the first one is about translating data points and field captions by having some sort of translation tables ready to go that we can tap into. We can blend the data model with some ready-made translations. And then we can use the artifact of user filters in Tableau. If we have some data like this, that could be the data we want to display. It's all in English, but you might have a requirement that perhaps we want to translate this field and perhaps this field here, right? So as you can see, the data points are in English, but I don't know, maybe we might need to translate them. So imagine if you have a table where you keep the translations, and in this case, I need 4 languages, specialized languages 3, and everybody else will get English. So I have this for subcategory, and I have this for customer segment. So what I did is a very simple example here that depending on the user that signs in, it uses the idea of user filters to automatically allocate the right language to the right users. And so if you look here at the bottom of my screen, we can simulate what the behavior for different users. So admin is not part of any specific language group. That's why we see everything in English. But I have a user here from, let's say, this guy, William, who is from a Chinese group. Then we get everything translated in Chinese. We have some data points there in the tooltips, also in Chinese. In this case, I would hide the header field there, the customer segment label. I would just put the actual label, right? We don't need to put a prefix for that. Yeah, and it works. Maybe I have another user from France. I think it was Pat. And that picks up the right columns from France. As you can see here as well, the data points are changed. The field headers are changed as well. I didn't choose to translate profit and sales, but we could have applied the same technique. In the data source, I could have had a field here called sales, and another one which is an exact copy of that in French, and another one in German, and et cetera, for profit as well, right? With the same data points. And this can be very easily done in a database. As a database view, you just basically add the same field with a different caption in the field. So the magic is actually happening, like I said, in the data model. Let me show you how this looks like. So basically, we have the fact table and the translation tables. One of the fields match. So of course, we can have this relationship. I have the English version on both sides for subcategory and this one. And I have also, if I go back there and pick one of those, and I have the formulas where we look at the group memberships, where we do the user filtering. So in this case, I'm using for coloring, I'm using things with translations. So if I go to column segment label, customer segment label. So it's a very simple solution here. We just allocate those users in a specific group, and once we check the membership, we just pick up the right columns, right? So we have duplicated columns in the data model. We just pick the correct one. So we do this for customer segment, and we do this for product subcategory as well. Here we have product subcategory. So yeah, so that's the first solution here, the very basic one, just to treat data points and labels here. I'll pause and let you guys comment before we move to the next one.
So that's all coming from the database, right? That all the language you need to store in the database along with the language preference for each retailers, right?
Correct. Yeah, that's the assumption, right? It doesn't scale really well because you need to know in advance all the distinct values here. It has to be there in the data. You're right.
Okay.
Yeah. So, I mean, so the second solution would be a way that scales better, but perhaps doesn't perform as good as this one. This performs really well because it's all part of your data source. It's going to be a query that's either going to go to this column or that column or that column and just display the value. So this is super fast, but yeah, it requires you to maintain those tables up to date. So let's say if those values are changing very often, you might want to have what I call the second solution here, a more real-time translation option. So the real-time translation using APIs. So are you guys familiar with the concept of using Python with Tableau, analytics extensions, TabPy at all?
Not me, no.
We are using Python differently, yeah, but not for with the Tableau.
Not directly. Okay. So just to then as a kickoff to this topic. So Tableau can be extended to connect with Python, MATLAB, or any API for that matter to provide, let's say, an additional field in your data source. So let's say if I have a dashboard like this, where we have the crimes by region, and we want to have an additional field, which is like a more advanced algorithm that detects if the location is a hotspot or not, right, where most of the crime is happening. So to calculate this, perhaps we want to leverage some machine learning models, some AI, some more advanced calculation. And in this example here, it's using Python to do the job. As you can see, this is vanilla Python code, importing NumPy library and calling the sklearn package and some functions and basically doing the classification and so on. So it's passing, the way it works, we pass some data from, which is already in the visualization, passed down to the algorithm. So in this case, we are passing the location, latitude and longitude, the distance between every incident recorded here, and the average incident count. And as you can see here, we have many arguments. The first one here, underscore arg1, points to the very first one, left to right, second one, third, and fourth, somewhere there, and fine. But yeah, so basically, the Python is getting some input from Tableau and spitting out in this return here a value, right, which we can use back in the visualization to do anything we want. We can color the visualization based on the points that come back from the API, in this case, Python. So we can use the same technique to translate data, right? So as you can imagine, if we could pass here the values we want to translate and speak back to Tableau the results of this translated, happy days. That's all we want. So this is what I did in this other example here. It's a very simple example. I have those fields, those are the categories, and I have a parameter here, which helps me decide which language I want to visualize this. So let's say if I choose, I don't know, let's have a look, Hebrew. I'm gonna test this one. I hope it works. Yeah, it does. So I decided to translate the headers and translate the captions here, right? Maybe one more. Let's pick Icelandic. Yeah. So this is doing in real time. So maybe you noticed there was a little bit of lag when I clicked and when I got the results. So the more data points we send, the more places we need to translate, the slower this will get. I have here the Python server executing those queries, and as you can imagine, this is making API calls to a server. In my case, I'm not sure if you can see this, quite small. I'm using a library which I found on the internet. Some guy basically created a Python code, a Python package that wraps the Google Translation API. So this is just the free package I found, and it has a lot of limitations. So I'm not suggesting you use this one, but if you like the solution, you probably want to use the Google APIs properly with a token, and obviously you'll be paying for that, but at least it won't expire. For me, yesterday I was playing with this and I hit the wall, and they blacklisted my IP. Luckily today they released again. So Yeah, so let me show you how the solution works. If I jump in here to this view. So, and as I said, this is an additional field you're adding to your data. In this case, I have the category. Here in the view, I have the original category, which I'm passing down as a... Right, so I have category, I have the category translated. So I need to pass down category and receive back this one. So let's have a look. So this is a script function that in this case returns a string. You can read more about the options here. So you can either return a decimal number, integer, boolean, or a string. In this case is a string. I'm passing the category, passing the target language. And in this case, I'm calling that API function to translate this text. The source language, Google is super good, so I can set it to auto, and it usually works, and the target language. So now the target language is, well, and then return the translated text. That's it. That's what it does. The target language, I created a parameter here. So for those who are familiar with Tableau, I just wanted to make this an option for the end user, right? So they could choose a parameter. So what I did, I basically just went to the documentation of Google Translation API, and I found, and this is more a tip for you, I found this list, which I can literally just copy, and you can use this to build your parameter here. You can add values from clipboard, and it filled this for me, right? So yeah, keep in mind you can actually do that. I guess that's about it for the function itself. So in the dashboard, I had not only those fields, but I had a little header here. So I was just saying that the text here, because you probably want to have some, text in the dashboard, like the titles, the dashboard titles. What I did here, I actually created a visualization which contains the data I want to translate. And I created a field. It's a dummy visualization, a dummy sheet that contains the text I want to translate. So the text was, how are you doing? So it's the same formula here, but I'm hard coding, how are you doing today? And getting back in the language. So yeah, this will be one additional API call to get this translated. So yeah, so that covers the second point. I mean, this scales better, as I said. You can literally get the values translated like this. So things that I didn't touch were, for instance, those headers here. So I talked in the beginning about the local, the language, the language of the dates. In this case, is actually still in English. The number formats are also in English, and that's because my machine is using the UK locale, and we happen to use short dates like this in English, and we use the 1000 separator, the comma 1000 separator. But if we want this to be dynamic as well, we can set the workbook here to a specific locale if we want to hard code to a specific thing, or if we want to keep it dynamic, that's what I have today, right? So just to show you the behavior, let's say if a different user would open this dashboard through their server and we haven't specified any language, so I could go to Icelandic here. Let's see if I have Icelandic. Yeah. So hopefully Tableau will show those numbers differently and the headers as well. Yeah. So yeah, as you can see, my with some, yeah. So this changes. The 1000 separators also changed to a point, right? So yeah, so this works nicely. So I would say keep it automatic, and that takes us to the next topic, which is how you do the automatic language selection in a parameter if you decide to do embedding, right? So we have already the parameter to select the language, and if you embed this in another system, how we would go about setting that. So let me bring up here the code in my machine. It's locked. Right, so what I have on the right is a very basic embed code pointing to the same visualization I published to my server. And what I have here is this parameter in the visualization. I'm not sure if you can see, my screen is quite large, my resolution. Is it okay? Can you all see the text still?
Yes, Alex.
Okay, perfect. So in this embed code, maybe you're familiar, maybe not, but essentially when you're initializing a visualization, when the body, when the page loads, you can initialize a visualization, and I have this init function, and you pass the URL, you pass some options, and you basically create, call our API to basically inject that viz, create an instance of the viz and inject on a specific location here in this container. So as you set the options, you can also set an initial language. So what I'm doing, I'm actually passing a filter or a parameter in the options object. And this just has to be one of the values that this parameter expects. So now I set to Spanish, but I could set to Finnish as well and save. The code is going to run again. And hopefully, if this is up and running, let me just go here, file, save. I guess I have to refresh this. Maybe I lost connection there. So now, as you can see, the parameter was set programmatically to Finnish. The values changed, the salutation changed. We just didn't change here the headers because my machine is in English regional local, but that wouldn't be something you need to worry. Like I said before, as long as you leave the Tableau server user local automatic, and the user has the machine pointing to the correct locale. So like in Spain, they would have a Spanish region set in the operating system of the computer they're using to access the visualization, then this should translate as well automatically. You don't have to worry about that. The number formats as well, you don't need to worry about that. Then, I mean, if you would want to combine all this, except for the API, let's say you want to have fields to do translation because it performs really well, and perhaps you have parameters there and you have a locale that you want to set. So yeah, maybe Tim can talk about templating and yeah, how this could scale by creating a template and creating multiple versions from the template.
Yeah, so I guess just to sort of piggyback on what Alex has said there, really, that the method that I'm going to sort of talk about now is a very generic method of which it's sort of a concept that I have customers who use, who then overlay the things that Alex has been talking about as well. So all of these methods can be completely combined. So I'm going to share my screen now. I've just got a couple of slides to sort of explain sort of the concept here. But effectively, what we're talking about here is creating a separate Tableau workbook for each individual language. So the sort of first row is a different workbook for each language: English, German, French, Chinese, whatever that may be. So here we first all of a sudden sort of explode the problem from having that one workbook with parameters to switch around to multiple workbooks, and then some mechanism of the user choosing which workbook to go to. Now, that can either be from the portal, so if they're logging into a portal and we're embedding that, we can pick up some user details and directly push them to the right app. Or if they're coming into Tableau itself, it could be through, say, a project or a site that they go to that has all of that collection in one language. So you could have an English project, a German project, and a Finnish project as well. So we've got to direct the user to the first sort of place where they're going to get their particular language workbook. The second thing as well to consider about this approach is this is changing the values in Tableau. So I'll show what actually gets shown, what actually gets changed in a minute. But this is actually sort of the column headers, text in the workbook itself. But this method, just by changing multiple workbooks, doesn't change the data. So in the very first example that Alex showed was you've got a lot of data, and the data itself has been translated, and we're flipping things using a parameter to do that. The technique that I see a lot of my people, my sort of customers use, is actually they have individual databases or individual data sources for each of the different languages. Now, often that's because they have different data sources for each of the different languages anyway. They may have different clients from different regions, so it sort of maps to that model, a little bit better than potentially the sort of single data source with row-level security. But to get the data to also change, we can talk about a method to change the data sources as well. So this is sort of what we're talking about here: multiple workbooks, which potentially all link to multiple different data sources to sort of drive the data language changing, and the Tableau workbooks to drive the Tableau sort of the sort of human readable content from the labels and Tableau side of things. And how it sort of breaks down is we don't actually have to maintain all of those different workbooks. That would be, pretty laborious process to do. So effectively what we have is one template workbook. So this one template workbook points to the template database, whatever your default language would be in. And we then parameterize the values in there with a token that we can then programmatically change later. So there's a few APIs moving around to do this process. The first is the REST API. And the REST API is a management API of Tableau, which means we can actually get hold programmatically of our workbook. So we take a copy of this template workbook. We can then generate as many different versions of this workbook as we want completely programmatically. We can just copy that TWIB file, generate as many different versions as we want. We've then got another API called the Document API in Tableau, which allows us to programmatically change things about that workbook. And one of those things that we can change about that workbook with the Document API is the data source itself. So this is where we can now start to build up a list automatically of different workbooks pointing to different data sources. So we've probably now got 3 here: English, German, French. They're now pointing to English, German, French data sources. So the data source in each of these workbooks has now been changed. But actually the text, the column headers, and the things that you see there haven't been changed. So far we've done nothing more than what Alex showed in that very first example, using the using the join of that sort of database. The next part we go into, however, is where we can start to almost think about the elements that we couldn't change via parameterization in the Tableau GUI. And we can do that by XML hacking. Now, effectively, what we talk about when we talk about XML hacking at Tableau is the Tableau document, the TWIB document itself, is just an XML file. And the Document API that Tableau provides is effectively just an XML parser that allows us to change those XML tags. However, what we sort of tend to find a lot of our customers do is they go a little bit further than the Document API, actually manipulate and massage that XML schema within inside Tableau themselves using Python, using whatever text technology they sort of want to, because ultimately it's just human readable text that's getting manipulated for these labels. And then again, they can use the REST API to publish these culmination, however many different workbooks you happen to have generated, back to the server, back to share them out. So that's a sort of automation process that sort of goes on around doing this, to sort of create a template app, use the APIs to generate multiple versions of that, use the Document API to switch data sources, and then use the XML hacking technique, shall we say, to modify that workbook. And I'm just going to sort of show you an example of kind of what I mean here, with a very, very simple workbook that I've got. So this is just I couldn't think of any simpler data than this. Just some names of Alex, Grant, and myself, just some random numbers. Today's date, just to pull through a bit of text, pull through some date, and we've got some number formats. If we look at sheet 1, we can see that the field names are called department, name, region, and number. Again, not particularly brilliant numbers. But this is sort of our default start place. And then what I've done is I've actually created and tokenized this. And what I mean by that is given all of my field names, all of my sheet names, tokenized aliases. So I've just used triple curly braces because that's not going to be used anywhere within the document. So it's a token that I can find programmatically. So I've called it Dept UK, first name, sales region, number, sheet 1, sheet 2, dashboard, for example, and then parameterize the sheets everywhere, so that we can sort of see that parameterization happen. And if I just open this I'm going to open it, just open it in Notepad, you can see this is just the XML of this particular workbook, so this particular TWB. So straight away we can see the locale at the top there, and that's the parameterization of ENBB, so that's just going to be English, just as a token to find. But of course, if I find any of these tokens, I can see that I've just created a caption, which is the human readable part, is called Dept UK, which is what we saw. But the actual name of the field underneath that is called department. So we're not changing the links to the data source itself, we're just changing that human readable caption that actually comes into it. So I've just got a couple of macros here. I'm just going to generate a German version. So that's just gone through, changed all those parameterizations into German. And if I just save a copy of that, let me save a copy of that as DE, for example. And if I just go back and I'll macro my UK version. So again, I've taken the tokens and given them British names there as well. And if I just save a copy of that as well to the UK, and again, all of that could obviously be automated in the background. And if I load up my version of German here, what you can see here is what this XML hacking has allowed us to do. And it's actually allowed us to change the values of these field name headers. So we've changed the values of the field name headers, we've changed the sheet names, we've changed the dashboard from my first dashboard. And then also it's allowed us to go in and actually change the text. So that was just a text block, today's date, heute datum. And it's also, obviously, we've changed that locale, which is something we just had a discussion about. So now the number formats have got commas in rather than full stops, which is the way in Germany. And the German standard is the dots as opposed to slashes in that date. So again, that's sort of an example of what we can change when we start to think about XML hacking, which is sort of, going into that workbook and sort of programmatically tweaking those values. And then, of course, we could use the document API to change the data. Equally, all of these different versions of that workbook could point to that same data source and be parameter driven to change the data inside that as well, which is why we sort of mentioned that they're sort of very much mix and match approaches to how you might go along with it. But the overarching concept here is you have a template workbook, and then using the APIs, you can programmatically make copies of them, repoint them to different data sources if that's something that you'd want to do, programmatically change these, and then republish back. So you're only ever developing on your template workbook, and you can automatically then create multiple versions. And then it's just how do you get your users to the right workbook, be that via the portal automatically working out who that user is, maybe got a language assigned to them in the portal, or giving them the option to choose themselves. I guess as a sort of pros and cons, just to sort of wrap up. Obviously, the pro is, I suppose, you've got much more fine-tuning ability to be able to change the text column headers, blocks of text directly inside the Tableau workbook. So you can effectively almost, if you want to get a more complete translation. Obviously, the downsides is it's a little bit more effort to set up. There's a lot more working parts, and I guess it is worth saying that although I could list a lot of customers who use this concept of the XML hacking, the document API is fully supported by Tableau to change the data sources. Changing the labels programmatically inside that TWB file isn't supported by Tableau, so we have no documentation on the Tableau TWIB schema itself. It is a case of going through and making sure that it does work to your own specifications and testing that. But actually, it isn't officially supported by Tableau to be able to do that. And while putting my slightly reserved hat on, Tableau could make a change to that workbook schema that could make some of that work redundant in a later release. That hasn't changed the basic functionality of the concept of a caption on a label and that sort of thing. Hasn't changed for a very long time. And I know a lot of customers actually use this approach. So there are cautions. You must be aware that it's not supported. But on the flip side, it's not a terrible approach to take either, which is why we talk about it in this scope here. So I guess that's sort of that final concept of that template, the XML hacking. So